Hey guys, and welcome back. Now, I know everyone here is familiar with that classic mushroom design from Super Mario, but what do you think would happen if the Mushroom Kingdom had a zombie outbreak? Today, let's find out, because this is Mario versus The Last of Us. To start things off, I began by sculpting all of the Mario details first. Once the mushroom is complete, I'll be sure to go back and infect everything with all those zombie Cordyceps after. With that in mind, I want it to look as if the fungus is actually floating above the ground. To make that happen, I found a clear plastic rod and anchored that down into the base. Next, I create a stencil for the circles and traced in the outline. In any Mario game, these are honestly just two-dimensional textures, but I want to make sure this looks like an actual real-life mushroom. So I'm going to try my best to add as much depth and real-life texture as possible. After that, I still need to work on the eyes. I took a ballpoint stylus, carved out 2 indentations, and finessed them into the correct shape. Once I had all the basic Mario elements in place, it was time to introduce the Cordyceps infection. But before I jump into that, if you're interested in zombies, hive minds, and infection outbreaks, I've been making a couple videos creating the Flood from Halo 1, 2, and 3. A lot of the same techniques went into making those, both the infection form and the carrier form. Feel free to check those out, the link is in the description below. But now, it's time to get back to adding in those Cordyceps and getting this zombie apocalypse started. I also looked at a lot of reference photos from The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. The art book is really good, as well as the game, obviously, but I also checked out Cordyceps in real life. I really like how the game designers made it look as if the flesh of the victim is literally ripping open with fungus growing out of it, so I'm gonna try my best to replicate that effect. Next, I sculpted several fungus platforms that are erupting asymmetrically from one side. I made sure to use aluminum foil on the inside of those for some added support. I added a couple more slashes and ridges, and made sure to add in varying styles of texture over the entire surface. Once a fungus actually starts to erupt, you can actually get infected just by breathing it. I really want to incorporate that idea, and luckily this sculpture still needs a bit of detail. So I sculpted 2 tendrils sprouting outwards and anchored those down into place. They kind of look like a dandelion once you've blown the seeds off, and just considering how fast a weed can travel and spread into your garden, I think the theme works pretty well with this. Finally, I added a couple areas with some small little mutations. I tried to put in as much irregular detail into those as possible, just to make it a little bit more interesting to look at. Right now, I am very happy with the sculpt of the mushroom and how it's all turned out. I just need to repeat the process to make the details on the base just as cool. I started off by building up 3 large pockets of spores. Now, to make these things look as gross as possible, again I went with that whole dandelion theme, but also mixed in the idea of a pimple that's about to burst. In order to make the base look like it's been completely overrun with fungus, I started sculpting some vines and layering them together. Now, I have the literal attention span of a goldfish, so you can imagine how well that went. 12 years later, here we are, and I'm now realizing I should have textured these elements before I set them into place, but I went ahead anyways, added the texture, and added some texture, and added some texture, trying to make sure this thing looks equally revolting from every single possible angle. But finally, with that nightmare behind me, I celebrated by sculpting a little baby mushroom growing out of the base. Cute. Hello. Now that the sculpt is complete, I'll remove that plastic rod and let the Sculpey bake in the oven for 45 minutes. Once it's fully cured and cool enough to touch, I'll put the rod back into place so I can start adding some color. Honestly, this has been one of those projects where I kept starting, getting busy with my job, and not really having the energy to come back and finish. That original sketch was done last year, and I'm now only getting started on the painting again, but sometimes it's kinda nice just to have a side project that's always around and on the back burner. I started off with a base coat, a light brown for the fungus and white for the spots. Of course, I had to add that classic Mario red for the main parts of the mushroom. It took a couple layers, but once I had everything covered with a few coats, I went in and started adding different shades of green all around the edges. I find that the fungus in The Last of Us is often very colorful despite how gross it looks, so I decided to blend a bit of yellow over the upper sections for some extra contrast. I did the opposite with a layer of purple, painting that into the recessed areas. And of course, my favorite part of any paint job is adding in a watered down black wash. I applied that to the entire sculpture and wiped away the excess paint. I also applied some blue highlights to draw attention to those little clusters of mutations, and I also did the same around the eyes. Now, in order to make these Cordyceps look old and moldy, I started to dry brush some white and gray paint into selective areas. This helps to tone down the vibrance and really brings out a lot of the detail. It's honestly one of the most satisfying things of the entire painting process for any model or miniature, and because I did the sculpt a couple months before I got around to painting, it's actually kind of fun to see all the work I had put into the sculpting process really come back to life. That is a zombie pun I did not plan, but that actually works. Finally, to make it even more disgusting, I mixed up some slime. As always, I added in some clear craft glue with a couple drops of paint. It typically dries way less visible than how it appears when it's still wet, so I made sure to add in a couple extra layers. I coated the surface, letting it drip down naturally onto the ground below. Once that was dry, I removed the masking tape from the plastic rod and glued all the pieces together. And just like that, this Mario vs. The Last of Us mushroom is complete. All that's left to do is sit back and enjoy the final result.